In this video, we're going all the way back to the very first basics of putting your instrument together. And I bet you might find one or two things in here that you don't normally do or that you've never known before, so make sure to watch till the end. My name is Josh Gu, and I'm taking my years of experience learning, teaching, and performing, and sharing all of my best clarinet and music tips so you can get more out of your practice, and most importantly, have fun. You can learn more about all of my many resources at QuickStartClarinet.com, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to get notified when I post new videos. So when it comes to the clarinet, there are 7 different pieces of it, and we have to figure out how to assemble them properly and make sure everything goes together well. Starting from the bottom, we have the bell of the clarinet. Then we have the lower joint. The lower joint's a little bit longer than the upper joint. It has these keys on it and these big circle pads. That's how you can identify it. It also has the thumb rest. That's probably the most identifiable part of the lower joint. We have that right hand thumb rest. Then we have the upper joint. Usually the upper joint will have the logo around here. You might be able to see that when it's pretty faded, but we have the upper joint. You can also tell them apart. The upper joint has a hole where the thumb goes. The upper joint also has cork on both tenons, whereas the lower joint only has cork on the bottom and then has the socket on the top for the upper joint to go into. Then we have the barrel, which goes at the top of the upper joint. And last but not least, we have sort of 3-in-1, the mouthpiece, the ligature that holds the reed on, and then of course the actual reed itself. So those are the pieces of the clarinet. Now let's look at putting them together and a couple other things we need to do before we start actually putting them together. So the very first thing that I like to do when I start assembling the instrument is actually take the reed out of its case, and these plastic cases that it comes in, or some of them come in paper cases now, those are totally fine for storing them. You can also get other reed cases, and they range in all kinds of different form factors. There's tons of different types of specific reed cases that you can get, but the ones that they come with are totally fine for starting out. So the first thing I like to do is take the reed out and put it in my mouth to start wetting the reed. I won't actually do that now so that I can talk to you, but we'll talk a little bit more about wetting the reed in a moment. The next thing that's very important to do, especially if you have a newer instrument, is you're going to probably want to put some cork grease on the corks. Hopefully your clarinet came with cork grease, and if it didn't, you should get some cork grease because it makes a big difference and makes it a lot easier to get things on and off. Helps prevent the potential of bending a key or things like that. So we just have some cork grease. It often looks like a tube of chapstick, but it's not chapstick, and you also should not use chapstick as cork grease. But when it comes to putting grease on the corks, we have those corks on the tenons like I was talking about, and we don't want to overdo it, and we want to make sure that it's applied evenly and kind of everywhere. So what I usually do is I put like just a little bit on one side, a little bit on another side, maybe just a few different spots, just like a tiny bit of grease on applied that way, and then rub it in with my fingers. This lets us get a nice even layer. We rub off any excess. We don't want excess cork grease building up. If in those little cracks there in that corner of the joints, if you're getting a lot of stuff building up there, then you're probably using too much cork grease. We really only need a thin layer to sort of get it going, and oftentimes, especially if it's an older instrument that the corks have been greased a lot, you don't need to use cork grease every time. It's just sort of as needed when it's feeling tight. When it's newer, you probably will need to do it every time for the first several times, and then you'll start to feel. And again, when it's older and the corks have been greased up, sometimes I'll just take that excess from the top joint, rub that around the middle joint as well, and that's usually enough to get it to go together nicely. With cork grease, really less is more, always. The cork grease can actually degrade the corks themselves and or the glue that holds the corks on. So if you're over greasing, then you'll have to end up replacing your tenon corks more often as well. So I usually do just the top, with some grease and then the excess on the middle tenon. Then for the lower one, I do it on its own. Again, just a few spots just to get some grease on there. Rub it around with my fingers. And then I take the excess from here and I do the cork on the mouthpiece with it. And usually that's more than enough cork grease to get everything to go together smoothly. If it's not going together smoothly, put a little bit more on. Again, always rub it in with your fingers and wipe off the excess. And then you should be good to start actually assembling once you have the corks greased and you're wetting the reed in your mouth. So when it comes to actually assembling, personally, I like to start at the mouthpiece and go down to the bell, but a lot of people teach and first learn to start at the bell and go up to the mouthpiece. It doesn't really matter too much either way, so I'll demonstrate mouthpiece to bell now. So mouthpiece goes in the top of the barrel. The barrel will have a little bit narrower top and a little bit wider bottom. You'll know pretty well if it's the correct side or not because one side fits pretty snugly, the other side just goes straight in, so that's the wrong side. We want the side that is a little bit snugger. With all of these corks, they work the best if you sort of twist a little bit as you push them in, so you're pushing and twisting. Just pushing can sometimes be a little bit stiffer. It's harder to get it to go in. The twisting helps. Same thing with getting it off. Twist a little bit, and it's so much easier than just pulling. Yeah, this is actually a really tight cork too, so it needs the twist to come out. You also might find that if you really get it stuck and you're really having a hard time, a little bit of rocking motion will help sort of get it moving, get it unstuck a little bit. So that can help as well. So we twist that cork in for the mouthpiece into the proper end of the barrel. Then we can do the top joint. When it comes to assembling the lower joint, top joint, the ones with the keys on them, you want to make sure that you aren't squeezing super hard on the keys, especially not putting any twisting pressure front to back this way, especially on these keys that stick out more. It's pretty easy for them to bend, especially sometimes on student model instruments. The keys are a little bit more flexible, so it's really easy to bend those. So I like to, usually I use my right hand and sort of put the fingers on the keys. These are the left hand keys where your left hand will go when you're actually playing, but I make sure to leave space around here so I'm not squishing these keys, and then again twist and push so that that goes on nice and easily. You could also do it with your left hand. There's less keys on this side, so that might be safer. Holding it kind of like you're playing and then twist. And most of the pressure, most of the force and the support when it comes to putting these together is in my palm on the wood here. So that's really where I'm sort of pushing from and supporting to get them together. And there's no keys there, so I'm not going to bend anything. Now, the very most important part of assembling the clarinet is the upper joint and the lower joint, whether you're going upper to lower or lower to upper, it doesn't matter. It's still important. There's this key here. This is called the bridge key. And you notice when I press down this ring, the bridge key goes up. And on the lower joint, there's also this bridge key. And when I press down on the keys, it also goes up. So what we want to avoid is having both bridge keys down as they're coming together, because they might knock into each other and bend. This is the most common repair issue on beginner students because they mess this up when you're putting it together. So be really aware of that bridge key. We also don't want to be pushing both keys and having them both up because they're going to run into each other again. So don't press the ring keys on the right hand on the lower joint so that the bridge key stays down. Do press the D ring, this is where your middle finger goes, on the left hand, so that bridge key goes up. And with that bridge key up and this bridge key down, you can again push and twist, and hopefully you can see that there's good clearance there so they're not going to run into each other. One other really important point about assembling the upper and lower joints is you probably won't be able to see there's little lines on the bridge key. Sometimes it's on the bottom, sometimes it's on the top, and you want those bridge keys to line up. An even better way to do it, because bridge keys vary a lot from model to model with how they're supposed to line up and the way that they look. So the best thing to do is find this post on the upper joint and line it up with this post on the lower joint. So if those are in alignment, then you should be good to go for having the instrument put together properly. You can see if they're really out of alignment, then you're going to run into problems. And also right now the bridge keys aren't even lined up, so there's going to be lots of problems there. A quick little advanced tip that you can also do to check the alignment of your bridge keys is you can press down the keys on the right hand and notice that the keys on the left hand should go down as well. That's the whole point of the bridge key, is so that when you push these down, these also go down. And you can check this pad. If this pad's wiggling, then that means you're not quite aligned. I'll show you what that would look like by getting it out of alignment. So I'm pushing down the right hand key, but you can see how that pad's still wiggling. It's not fully sealing. That means that it's not properly aligned. The other thing that you might have if it's the other way is you'll push this down and this pad goes down fine, but this one's not fully sealing, and that one's really hard to push down all the way. So those are some sort of advanced ways that you can check the alignment, but if you line up these posts, then you're going to be in good shape. And then last but not least, we have the bell. Again, don't squish the keys. I'm putting most of the support into the wood with my palm, and then twist and push, and the bell is on, and your clarinet is assembled. But we aren't quite ready to play yet because we don't have a reed on, and the reed is probably the most important part for actually making sound. So going back to wetting the reed, as you're putting it together, you should have been wetting your reed so that it's nice and ready to go. I like to wet both sides of the reed, and I usually just do it in my mouth. Just like that. Nothing complicated, nothing too crazy about it. Some people put their reeds in water. That's totally fine as well. When it comes to wetting the reed, we want to remember that it's an organic material if you're playing on a cane reed, and we don't want to get it too soaking wet. We're not trying to get the full thing saturated with saliva or with water. We're just trying to dampen it a little bit so that it has some flexibility to it. So I wet the tip while I'm putting it together, then I'll wet the other end of it, still while I'm putting it together, and the whole reed should be wet. The reason why I wet the whole thing is because to some extent I think the whole reed is vibrating, but even more important than that, I think having the whole length of it wet will help it to sort of seal against the mouthpiece. And when it comes to reeds, there's lots of crazy things that clarinetists do to try to appeal to the reed gods so that our reeds are as good as they can be. So this might just be a crazy thing that I do, but you might want to give it a try and wet both sides and see if you notice any difference. It's a small difference if there is any difference, so it's not the end of the world either way. Now, when it comes to putting the reed on the mouthpiece, there are a few important things here. Some people, like I do, take the ligature off, then put the reed on, then put the ligature on. Some people like to leave the ligature on and then sort of feed the reed through it. You can see I'm not very good at that, but you can do that as well. I personally take the ligature off just because it's easier to really get the placement of the reed that I want. The danger with taking the ligature off is that you can get your reed on and then go to put the ligature on and then miss and chip your reed, and then your reed's bad. But the other way, you could also drop your reed and break your reed and then cause problems there. So either way is totally fine. I did have one mouthpiece maker say you should take the ligature off because the sliding the reed in between can actually damage the mouthpiece by doing that many, many times. But I don't think that's anything that you really need to worry about as a beginner. Maybe if you're an advanced professional and you really, really care about your mouthpiece, then maybe taking the ligature off is better. Now, when it comes to placing the reed, there's all kinds of advice that you'll hear of, like, oh, you should see the reed like just a fingernail's length over the mouthpiece, or you should see the mouthpiece just a fingernail length over the reed. And honestly, there's no perfect place. Everybody wants there to be a perfect reed or a perfect thing to do to make your reed play great, or a perfect placement of the reed on the mouthpiece that's going to make it work. But honestly, there's no perfect to it. I will give you a tip though. When it comes to the placement of the reed, if you move it up just a little bit, like that's too much even, just a little bit up will make it feel a little bit firmer, and a little bit down will make it feel lighter. And pretty much this is the lowest you can go, and where I was before is pretty much the highest you can go. So it's a very limited range of options, but higher is harder, lower is softer. So get your reed somewhere where you think it might work well, put your ligature on, and then you can play test it and adjust up and down to make it harder, up, softer, down, whatever you need. Now when it comes to the ligature, there's a couple important parts for ligature placement. First, you can see that there's sort of the bark of the cane, then it goes into the actual cane of the reed. We want to make sure the ligature is below that. I like to do about an equal amount of bark on the top to bark on the bottom. Maybe there's usually a little bit more bark on the bottom, but somewhere in between those spots is the best place for the ligature. Then the other important part is we don't want to crank it down. We don't have to go until these screws stop turning. The reed needs to vibrate. So if we crank that down too much, then it's going to be pinching off vibrations. So I have it nice and loose. I sort of push it down to where it stops, and then I do just like half a turn just to snug it up, just to where there's a tiny bit of resistance in the screw. And that's good. As long as the reed's not freely wiggling around, then your ligature is plenty tight. And if you have to really try to loosen it, then your ligature is too tight. And then the last part about the ligature that's super duper important is there's some ligatures like this. There's some ligatures like this. There's all kinds of different ligatures. They can be made out of leather, metal, plastic. They come in all kinds of things. There's even wooden ligatures that exist. But the most important part is this is kind of a standard ligature. This ligature is what's called an inverted ligature. So if I was to put it on, it would go this way. Obviously not that high up, but you can see the screws are on the reed side on the standard ligature. The screw, and there can be anywhere from 1 to 3 screws. The screw on this one is on the opposite side of the reed because this is an inverted ligature. The way to know is that when your ligature is on and you're looking at the reed, the screw should be on the right side. So you can see if I turn this around and put the screw on the reed side, now the screw's on the left side. That's wrong. We want the screw on the right side. So that's what determines if the screws are on the reed side or the screws are on the mouthpiece side, is when you're looking at the reed, you're tightening the screws with your right hand. And now you're ready to play and ready to practice your clarinet. You have it all put together, ready to go and properly assembled. I do also want to talk in this video though about proper disassembly. So it's basically exactly the same as what you did assembling. Take the reed off, put the reed in whatever case you're using. Be careful with that. It's really important to take the reed off and not leave the reed on the mouthpiece. Some people do that, but that will cause the reed to warp, and it can also cause your mouthpiece to warp, which can cause problems. So always take the reed off when you're done. You're also going to want to swab the instrument. I have a very in-depth video on swabbing that you can check out, so check that out if you're unsure about how to swab. A couple quick tips here. Never swab the mouthpiece while it's still attached. If you drop the swab all the way through and it hits the mouthpiece, that can cause damage to your mouthpiece. So always take the mouthpiece off, swab it separately from the rest of the instrument. Then you swab it out, clean it up, take it apart, same way, don't break anything. Press these keys to lift up the bridge key when you take apart the upper and lower joints, and then take the bell off, and you're good to go with the disassembly. I hope that you found something useful and helpful, maybe a new little tidbit of information that you've never done before, or if this is your first time putting your clarinet together, congratulations. I hope you have a great time with your clarinet. I also want to mention that there's a whole Back to Basics playlist that I'm putting together with all of the fundamentals of playing, going nice and in-depth. So there's already one on reeds, if you want to know more about reeds and what reed strength you should be playing on. There's one on embouchure to actually get a good sound on the instrument. So check the description for a link to that playlist if you want to learn how to actually play now that you have the instrument put together. Leave a comment if there's anything that I missed or any other good tips that you have for putting the clarinet together, or any other clarinet tips or anything that you would like to see me make a video on. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in another one. And last but not least, a huge heartfelt thank you to the Dennersons. This is like the QuickStart Clarinet family who supports the channel and helps to make everything that I do possible. If you would like to support the channel and get some awesome rewards in return where we can work one-on-one over video and you can have my full support moving forward on your clarinet journey, then go to quickstartclarinet.com/supporter.